Hi there. Welcome back to another edition of Meet the Solutionaries on greentv.com. Our founder, John Lake, was so visionary that he got greentv.com, the URL, some 25 years ago. And my guest, Ellen Strickland, has been covering the Green Beat for even longer than I have, which is about 25 years, more than 40 years. So very pleased and honored to have Ellen Strickland with us. If I was a pioneer in green media, you are a pioneer in green living, really all things green. You go way back and you've got a designer background and you were doing exhibits, I understand, for zoos and museums. And along the way had a bit of an eco epiphany and made a turn and then maybe another turn. And what you're doing right now, even more exciting because it's really where the movement needs to go. And that's where we get feedback for the products we use. We'll get into that in a minute. But first, I just want to acknowledge all the awards you've received because that doesn't happen every day. Your awards include International Green Industry Hall of Fame, congratulations, Eco Pioneer Award from the Sustainable Business Council of Los Angeles, Clinton Global Initiative, Environmentalist of the Year. Now that's impressive. And New York Times recognition in the green design arena. So that's a lot. I can appreciate that. So
thanks very much. I appreciate all the recognition.
Yeah, those who have been at it a long time, including myself, deserve a little bit of recognition. We were there before green was cool, or as I say, before green was hot, because when we were talking about, healthy materials and environmental health and toxic chemicals in products and recycling and composting and all those things, we weren't necessarily including climate change, because 25 years ago, of course, that was just barely becoming global warming. And my case is garbage to global warming. You came into it from a designer point of view and healthy living point of view. So congrats, really. I really have a lot of respect for hanging in there this long, because it's taken a while for the world to catch up and wake up, hasn't it?
Well, and it's true. I think that things have changed quite a lot since we first started talking about it, maybe in my case, the late 70s. One of the first jobs I ever had, or projects that I was involved in, was for the Vermont State Energy Fair. And back then, what energy conversations were about were things like passive solar design, where you were putting greenhouse spaces on your house so that you got warmer heat being retained, into your house. In a time in the winter for when you needed it in New England, for example. So the reasons we were doing it were very different. We talked about recycling. Nuclear energy was, big on the scene back then. So I was involved with nuclear waste management projects and things like that, where it had to do with how it impacted our communities, but on a smaller scale. And now the language has all changed. The way we talk about sustainability and green and health and all the things that they converge into, it's been interesting to grow up with it, I think, over all these years. And as a designer, one of the things that happened was you talked about having an epiphany. Here I thought I was so cool and smart with all these new projects I was doing all the time with exhibits around the country. And what I discovered was, to my horror, that I didn't know enough. I didn't know all the information I needed to know to do a good job. And I was designing a habitat for a walrus. And one of the things that a walrus needs is a rough surface to abrade his tusks, like brushing your teeth. And so we were making this with a sort of an aggregate, a cement compound that has silica in it. And what I didn't realize is that in having a tusk being abraded against that kind of a compound, you're actually making them more vulnerable to chemicals and surface materials that are actually toxic to them rather than helpful. So I had a lot to learn. From that point on, I realized I was doing a job I didn't have enough information for. And if I really wanted to think of myself as being environmentally friendly and helpful to the habitats, that I had to learn a lot more about what things were made of. And that's really what kicked this off for me in a much more intense and vigorous way in the late 80s, early 90s. And I started gathering information then.
I was going to say, back in the late 80s, you probably couldn't go take a course in environmental science or environmental studies, maybe if you looked really hard, but it not anything like is available now. So how did you educate yourself?
So I started learning a lot more about materials in general, what they were made from. And I had actually gone back to school here in California to learn a little bit more about environmental science as well. And one of the courses I took was in materials science at UCSB. And it happened that I got involved with some people there that were very helpful in sort of upgrading my own knowledge base and what kinds of things are involved in making materials these days, and how much of it is chemistry and how much of it is synthetic materials, and how many aggregates and things get involved in making composites. And there was a whole lot of technical information I just hadn't had. But what I also started to learn a lot more about was the actual health impact of all of this, because it turns out that there's a real chemical soup out there that we use all the time to make new fabrics, new textiles, new materials that we put all over our bodies and in our homes. And they were not necessarily designed to play well together. They've all been made by different companies, and it turns out that some of those will have bad reactions with others. And this is the whole area that we have to learn a lot more about in order to create healthier interior environments for all of us.
I remember 20 years ago or so, I interviewed Ray Anderson of Mohawk Carpets, and he famously really was a pioneer in greening, corporate America. And in particular, they invented carpet tiles so that if something spilled on a carpet, you didn't have to remove the whole thing or a big section, but just tile of it, piece of it. And that was the first time I learned about low VOC carpets. That's the off-gassing, and low VOC or non-VOC paints. What's the status of that now? Has everything gone towards that end of non or low VOC, or is it still you have to ask for it if you happen to know about it?
Well, there's two different discussions really going on, I think, sometimes in green or sustainability. There is environmental awareness and how the impact of materials affects the climate health, if you will, or the climate wellness of what we create. But there's also human health and sort of personal contact components to it too. And when you were talking about a house, and Ray Anderson was certainly looking into this even right up until his final years, there's some common sense questions that come up, like when you have a baby or a pet crawling around on the floor. So in this case, with a carpet, that baby or pet with a very vulnerable immune system is inhaling or absorbing all the chemicals and things that off-gas from those materials. So there's a whole piece of this environmental sustainability that has to do with health as well for both us and the environment in terms of what we leave behind and what we put out there.
And it turns out there is a huge correlation between personal health and planetary health.
Yes.
What's good for one is good for the other, and bad for one is bad for the other. There's no mystery there, but there is this still burgeoning awareness. If we didn't know what we didn't know, and now we know more. Do we know enough?
No, and I think that one of the biggest problems I think I have had to confront with myself and in business over the last 20 or so years is that we have to learn language that we can all understand. So you have chemists, and you have physical physicists, and you have environmental scientists, and you have climate specialists, and you have all these people who come from very specialized worlds and languages. And then you have consumers that are trying to understand, who actually hold a lot of power. They have a lot of ability as the people buying the stuff to make changes and what kinds of things we use. But if they don't know enough about what goes into what things are made of, and how they off-gas and all the things that sort of happen from them when they're done with them too, and waste, then they aren't going to care enough about making a difference, in terms of how that changes. And I think one of the most important jobs we all have as people involved in this field is to help every person, every layperson out there understand better what we're talking about, so they can embrace it and want to bring it into their lives and have it make a change in their backyard as well.
Well, and that's one of the reasons we started Green TV, because how do you educate adults? Young people are getting it in school. They get it just through osmosis, because fortunately, most of them, are looking ahead and they're not liking what they see appropriately, and they're not so happy with us appropriately. But we adults who have been out of school quite a while, how are we supposed to learn all those things? And mainstream media, as we talk a lot here on Green TV, has not done a good job of making this part of the news mix. But what more important news is there? So what do you think people can do if they want to learn more besides watch Green TV and people like you? Most people don't have time to read books, documentaries. The Environmental Working Group, I know, Ken Cook was on my show 2 decades ago, so I'm very aware of them. They were early on in coming up with lists of good things and bad things to avoid. But are there other organizations out there that you can recommend, in addition to what you're working on, that will make kind of one-stop shopping for a lot of this information?
Well, one of the things I think that I'm also starting to discover is that people have the biggest impact in their own local community. That's what they know, and that's where they live, and that's where they spend all their time. So if they actually look within their own state, region, city, town, or county, they can find that there are a lot of local organizations that are then tied to bigger national ones. So you're looking for local chapters. That's the first thing I always recommend, is to look for what's already in your neighborhood so you can try to make a difference there. I found that in retail, one of the things that happened is that we created the stores on this sort of bigger idea of bringing green products to everybody. But what really mattered was addressing and communicating with the people in my own neighborhood that needed it the most. So the people who come with chemical sensitivities, personal health challenges, or they just have a concern about waste management in their own neighborhood, you have to go by what's available and resources there. So you find out what kinds of recycling programs are going on. You find out about what kinds of county-wide programs have been set up to help with these kinds of things, because that's where you're going to have the biggest change and impact. It's great when we all go and write nationally, but I think we have to act more locally as well.
And you had a brick and mortar store for many years locally.
Yes.
What was that experience like, being an early adopter and a pioneer in green living, shops, if you will?
I think what shocked me the most was finding out that there's so much we don't know about how things are made. And even to this day, I'm learning so much more about how manufacturing really works as a process, and how there's a whole language about it that has to be communicated to us as consumers, so we understand what it really costs to make something. When you talk about the true cost of a product, it's not just what it got sold to a retailer for as a wholesale price, but there's all the transport, there's all the impacts of GHG emissions, there's all the fines and things that have to be paid along the many steps along the way that they have to build into their profit as well. And so what I'm finding is that if we can learn a language that we can all appreciate and understand, all the way from sourcing materials that go into making a product all the way to selling it in the store, there's a much better appreciation for what things are as an end result, how they're made and what really went into making them be as sustainable or healthy as they are. I found, for example, that in learning about making products and what they're made from, for example, there's over 80,000 chemicals that exist out there in the world that are what make up a lot of the plastics and the products and the things that we make in here.
Including makeup.
Yes, makeup, literally makeup.
Regulated.
And of that, there's maybe 200 that have been assessed by the EPA. It's probably a little bigger now. But in this country alone, when you think of all that stuff that isn't really evaluated for what its long-term impact is on the people and the environment, it's scary that we have so far to catch up with ourselves in terms of what we invent and then how we actually understand their long-term impact. Yeah.
I was shocked to learn that the materials, the ingredients that go into mascara, for instance, are not regulated. So they can put whatever they want in there. Yeah, maybe my lashes look good, but it's really bad for your skin.
Yeah.
And that, I know that is an area that is getting more attention and is getting better, but it's just a good example of like things people assume. You think that the government said this is okay, or they wouldn't sell it.
Well, there's not a lot of trust that you find with everybody you talk to these days. Trust is one of the most valuable things we have that's eroding. And because we can't trust the information we're getting all the time, you find that your ability to make smart, educated decisions about what to purchase, have been eroded as well. And I also found a lot of times I would have people come to the stores who would say, I want to buy the healthiest thing, but quite honestly, with all these certifications and all these different programs and all the information I get out there, I don't know what's really true. I don't know what to trust as the thing to really help me make a smarter decision. And it's true, you could have people there were greenwashers out there too, who would say things about products that would make you believe that you standing in California, that this flooring material was the best one you should buy, when in fact, it probably was better off if you were in France. It makes a difference where you live as well in your own region.
I always thought there should be, there's the good housekeeping seal of approval, a good earthkeeping seal of approval. Is anyone doing that on kind of a broad basis? And is that similar to what you mentioned that you were working on?
So good housekeeping, it happens that they do have a green good housekeeping seal of approval now that's been in existence for, I think, over a decade or more. And I think its exposure maybe just isn't as big as it needs to be for people to really understand how they're going about the evaluations. But along with them, I think globally, there's over 600 different certification systems that are out there in the world that are in various ways and degrees trying to assess how sustainable or healthy a product is. And of that, there may be 50 or so that we see on a regular basis here in the United States that are in active use. But even of those, even if we just take 50 out of the 600, they have different ways of evaluating products. They use different standards. They have different specialties that they're looking at. Some may be just for electronics, and others may be for building materials, and others may be for cosmetics, as you were mentioning. And unfortunately, there isn't really a set standard for all of them so that they're not all using the same language. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I'm involved in now is a project where we're actually trying to automate for the consumer a product evaluation program or rating program that incorporates all of these along with a lot of the information that's out there sort of in the general atmosphere of the internet and everywhere else, that puts a lot of this all together and aggregates it into one place, one location, where you can actually determine and rate for yourself some of the best attributes you want about a product when you shop. And we're going to automate it so that it is something that you could then see on millions of SKUs out there for different companies that they could actually use to help the general consumer assess what makes something best for them in terms of health and sustainability.
Given the wide world of products, everything from cosmetics to cars to ketchup, I mean, how can any one organization even try to, put a realistic, helpful feedback assessment on a label? I know we recently talked to Michelle Lee. They talk about clever carbon and quantifying the carbon footprint of products. That alone is monumental. But are you looking at everything from the upstream to the downstream, meaning what goes into a product, how it gets, recycled or not, where the waste stream goes, as well as, all the things we've been talking about, the health aspects, because, wow, that's very much needed and super ambitious.
Very ambitious. We are starting with that life cycle analysis approach and we're staying product centric. So essentially what we say is, yes, everything that goes into making this product and bringing it to you, and then what its end result is too. For example, in manufacturing, there's now different approaches that you can use because of new technology and the internet itself too, information age, that allows you to go from, instead of looking at subtractive manufacturing only, you can look at additive with things like 3D printing or new information database in the cloud, and things that allow you to rethink the way you're going to produce products and bring them into the world. And then there are other people who focus on waste management systems that are actually more like you think of with a circular economy, where you're reusing, rethinking, refurbishing, regathering all this information and the data, and you repurpose it back to be used again. Or there are other people who specialize on just thinking about the chemistry itself. And can we actually replace a toxic chemical with maybe an alternative that is still letting you have the same performance in the product, but without the hazards that chemical of concern did offer in the first place. And so there are a lot of different approaches, and what we're trying to do is put as much of this all together as we can and simplify it into some consumer-based language that allows us to present for the consumer a much simpler rating system of maybe 1 through 5 that just gives you a starting place. And then the system itself will also give you more positive solutions and alternatives and things that you can consider as both the manufacturer and the buyer, the consumer, to make changes as you go.
One of the impediments has been all along, oh, well, it costs more to have the greener alternative. Is that still the case? Is that being addressed? And I'm sure that the more demand increases, the more products there'll be, the more competition there'll be, the more the prices will come down. Where are we in that process?
I think like with any system, when it's making a transition and changing, the initial fear and concern is that things are going to cost more and it's not going to work because we don't know it as well and we have to adjust to it. But in fact, some of the changes that we make cost less and they provide more benefits. So when you ask, well, what are the benefits of buying a sustainable product? Sometimes just by buying sustainably, you actually save money because you're avoiding some of the maintenance costs or the issues down the road. A good example would be, in many cases, people were concerned about plastic decking or composite decking that was made of different materials. How was that going to work? Well, it turned out that if you buy certain kinds of products that don't require maintenance long term, then you save all that time and labor and the cost of maintenance products for replacing on the long term. So there are ways of thinking about designing a product where you design it for disassembly. You design it where it breaks down into the different parts that are easier to recycle in the long run. So then you've saved money in that process as well. Or you design for using fewer materials to make the product in the first place. So you're buying less stuff, you're using less stuff, or you can buy recycled material that then gets built in and you're not having to buy virgin material. So there are different ways of thinking about putting the product together, how you then assemble it and the manufacturer systems you use, and then how you're going to break it all down at the end that actually can help you save money as well as create new incentive programs for it as well.
Design for disassembly and also a producer packaging.
Yes.
All those terms are coming back to me from my early Trash Talk days. We're talking 25 years ago. Have those movements and zero waste accelerated? I'm sure not quickly enough, but I remember, and I tell this story because it blew my mind, learning that Hewlett Packard was designing its printers designed for disassembly for the European markets because they were demanding it. There was a mandate for it when they were not making those same machines for
the United States,
because we were too stupid to ask for it.
Well, that's another problem we have in sustainability too, is that the different countries and the different areas in the world have different regulations and requirements, and that's based on our own different needs and desires for what we want to create and what our regulations are. It's true. I find that there are a lot of European countries that are way ahead of us in terms of some of this thinking overall, but the United States is catching up in terms of its own needs and crises that it has to deal with in terms of climate change and the things that we're having to face. And in fact, it's interesting, I think that the pandemic, the COVID crisis, whatever you want to call it, there were a lot of changes that will result in good solutions for the United States because of the fact that we had to make such a drastic change to adapt. There are all kinds of changes happening in manufacturing, for one, that are having to change the way they manufacture. Instead of manufacturing for stocking big supply, they may be thinking about making to order so that, in fact, they don't buy as much stuff because the supply chain has all its challenges. So consequently, they're rethinking the way they set up their products to make them available. I think the big shift to online e-commerce is changing a lot of things too.
What do you think of this delivery system that, just exploded during the pandemic and of course made Jeff Bezos even richer? Amazon trucks, omnipresent. I personally don't use it. I feel like they're just big, but my family does. So, they're in a way positive because my husband or daughter aren't driving their car to the store. They're getting it delivered to our doorstep. But I don't know if you've ever done that math to see how that balances out, because it's certainly a big trend. And, yes, during COVID, there was a good reason to get things delivered because it wasn't safe to go to the store. But it seems like just like working from home, it looks like we're not going to go back to that. And do you see that as a positive or net negative?
I think there's going to be some on both sides. And quite honestly speaking, as someone who was in brick and mortar retail, who was like a little mom and pop shop in a couple of different places, it changed the way we could work. Amazon's growth changed our ability to use the same kinds of sort of infrastructures that we had for decades, in terms of how we did business as little stores. And I ended up feeling that, I had to figure out how to join, but be still sustainably minded the way I wanted to be as part of the system, because I couldn't do things the way I always had. This is the way the world is moving, and out of this, we have to find the ways that we're going to create more sustainable language, more sustainable solutions that, in fact, we will discover because of the growth of things like Amazon. We will now come up with new ideas, new designs, new systems that, in fact, will play better with them, and in fact force them, I think, to make better sustainable decisions as well. That's my hope out of the whole thing.
And companies like Amazon are certainly mostly from their employees pushing from the bottom up, more greener policies and climate responsibility. But of course, none of that's happening fast enough.
Right.
But, it seems that it is, as always, sort of the grassroots, that really have to push at the top. And, I don't know, it's hard to tell if it's token. Walmart has been touting its green initiatives for a long time. And they certainly, because they're the big elephant in the room, they have 60,000 vendors last time I interviewed them. That was 10 years ago, so many more. They do have an impact on the people that serve them. And if they require certain standards, that does have an impact. But it just seems like the bigger ones are just getting to be so big that, is it better that they've got sustainability kind of maybe threaded throughout their policies, but they're always building ever bigger Walmarts across the world. So,
however, there are some givens. There are some givens that we live in a world of finite resources if we don't treat them right. And so that will certainly make some changes happen, because the less of the stuff we have to make things with, the less stuff we'll be able to make. So there's that goes on. There's also changing attitudes and generations, where I think some of the Gen Xers and millennials and people coming along in the next groups below me care for different ways of doing their day-to-day life. They don't necessarily collect as much stuff, or they collect different kinds of things that are more sustainable. They're growing up with sustainability in a way I didn't, and so they don't have to fight for it in the same way. I think they have to bring it to the rest of us to live day to day. And I think there's another piece of it too, which is that simply nature in itself, I think, as it starts to shift and change, those of us who really love it want to hold on to it, and we will have to help fight for the ways to make that happen over the next few decades to ensure that it will still be here. And I think that we all have to learn to adjust in little ways and big ways to the changes that are happening to our entire world. I'm starting to sound like my parents did, and it starts to scare me, about saying, well, in my day, they used to do things like this.
Finish your
no
food.
longer true. I have to adjust.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you've started to hear about the degrowth movement and basically saying that there's no such thing as green consumption or green building. We really just have to scale down what we're extracting, using, wasting big time, or none of this is going to matter if we destroy the climate, which we are seemingly in the process of at least compromising our climate. Will you factor that into your work in any way? Because yes, people are still going to need things, but you go to CVS and there's 200 brands of shampoo, really. I know when people from out of this country come in, they just can't believe the choices, and it's too much, really, especially when you consider how many resources that takes and how many people in the rest of the world would be happy to have 2 brands of toothpaste.
Right. I think that perspective on that is one of the things that's the most shocking when you go outside of our country, or when you expose yourself to people who don't have the same richness that we do and opportunities. But we're operating now on a global scale, and we have to share globally with everybody else. And because the resources are yes, abundant, but limited in terms of the scale of what we're trying to create, things will have to adjust and shift. I think we do it all the time without recognizing it, but even more so now, it's hitting more critical points where it's true. If we don't take care of this soon, we won't have the opportunity to make the change. So my job as somebody involved in this all these years is I want to stay on the positive side with solutions. I want to keep offering the things that become answers rather than just feeling fear and scared about it and overwhelmed. So I have to keep it right-sized and bite-sized for not only myself, but for everybody else that I want to share it with.
I think there's a concern among maybe more typical Americans who are not necessarily tuned into their greener side or greener potential to feel it's all about scarcity. Well, you can't take my SUV away, or I want a big house, or I want to have all these things. And that attitude, while you perhaps can't blame people who are working their way up the socioeconomic ladder, is what's killing a lot of nature. And it really, the big surprise is, all that stuff doesn't make you happier. It's just more house to take care of and more car payments. And it's true that, sometimes having less is more. And I know there's certainly a movement that is getting, out there, that, less is truly more, that there's so many ways to have a satisfying life that have nothing to do with products and consuming.
Yes.
And its community and its purpose. And especially when people really understand what we're up against, how dire the planetary pickle is right now. So let's hope that really can start shifting, because otherwise, as long as those of us in the green lane are doing everything we can, but those in the middle 6 lanes, while we're off, the right-hand lane, maybe the left-hand lane, are doing things the way they've always been done, it just seems like that behavior is going to outweigh the good that some of us have been, trying to do and trying to spread the green gospel, if you will.
It's interesting. I used to say, well, I want to wake up every day knowing that if I were to get hit by the bus today, I would feel good about what I did. Well, in fact, I feel it's true. But the one thing I have to keep in check now is the angst. Like, I don't want to get up every day feeling like I have to hurry up to do more to make it feel better for everybody else. What I have to do is keep it in balance and perspective. And I want to make this day of my life count. And I want to make sure that I spread that message with everybody around me as well, so that we all can collectively make it a better opportunity for everyone.
That's a good point to end on, because we could talk all day about all things green, all shades of green. But that, I do feel that sense of urgency, and it doesn't always serve me or my family or even my work, because there is the reality, there is planetary urgency, but the reality is also there's only so much each of us can do. So it's good to have that awareness, but not necessarily to feel it in your, gut every day, because it causes spilkas, stomach upset. And just you can't be sufficient when you're not calm. So your partner, Chris.
Thank you for that reminder. I'm glad to get it again.
Well, you probably get it from your partner, because Chris tells me, slow down, Betsy. We got to take our time. We got to do this right. It's like, but there's no time, And both are true. Both are true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's been such a delight, Ellen Strickland, for joining us.
Thank you, Betsy.
To have this opportunity, because I had certainly been aware of your work for as long as I've known Chris, which is about a decade, I suppose. And he's always talking about your work. And I said, we got to get her on Green TV. So thanks for being available. We finally did it, and we'll check back with you. Really excited about your new venture. Any idea when that will be coming online or going live?
Well, we're working on the prototype for the automation now. So we hope to be getting this, the prototype finished in the next month or so. And then I think you'll see something in the next year where we begin to really start to scale it into a system that everybody could use. Yeah.
Great. And then you can partner with Green TV. And in the meantime, Ellen, please tell all your green friends to subscribe to Green TV's YouTube channel. The more subscribers we get, the sooner we can start going live, and we can have these conversations all day long, which, we'll still not get to everything. We'll still run out of time. So thanks for joining us. And thank you to our editor, CFA Weiss, Christine Weiss, but she likes us to call her CFA Weiss. She says there's too many Christine Weisses in the world. So she's the one that will make this look as close to perfect as possible. And also want to thank our co-founder, John Lake, who has been holding the Green TV torch till I came along, and he was looking for a content creator, and I was looking for a platform. So hopefully a marriage made in green heaven, so we can be the tide that lifts all green boats and talk about all shades of green, truly, because while climate is the mother of all eco challenges, it's not in and of itself the only one. There are so many other aspects to look at all at once, and to expedite awareness and actions on all at once. So thanks for your part, and
thank you. Go Green TV.
Go forth and greenify.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.